Marine conferences are a place where you can have a lot of fun. You can meet new people, you can meet old friends and colleagues, you can establish new collaborations. But it's also a place where it can be overwhelming. It can be intimidating for a lot of people, especially those who are introverts, and it could be a drain on your social battery. So when you do and prepare for a conference that's usually a week long in a place that's far away, you know that you're going to have to rest up, and you know you're going to have to go through all of those emotions when you go into a conference. But imagine not only doing one conference, but two conferences in a row where you have to do virtually the same thing in terms of interacting, mingling, doing presentations. It's a lot. So I was a little taken back when I heard a few people went to the International Marine Conservation Congress that happened in October earlier this month, as well as the European Elasmobranch Society, doing it all together in a span of 2 weeks. Well, I was able to talk to one of the people who were able to do that, Dr. Ayla Hodgson. She is not only a podcaster, but a fellow scientist, a conservationist. She works with the Save Our Seas Foundation, and she's here today to tell us how she got through 2 weeks of conferences, international conferences, where she played a big role and had multiple, I guess, plans and goals for each one of those conferences. So we're going to talk to Ayla on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about conferences, because that is one of the places where I have to admit, I flourish. I enjoy going to conferences. I haven't been to a conference in a long time because my full-time job is not really in the marine science and conservation world, although the podcasting can lend me to that. But I haven't been in a while. COVID and all these other things, it gets expensive sometimes. But when you do, and when people are able to go and be at a conference like the International Marine Conservation Congress or the European Elasmobranch Association Conference, it is a whirlwind. It is one of those things where your adrenaline is keeping you through the entire week or however many days the conference is. You're mingling with people. You're sitting in on a number of different sessions that you have to plan out really quickly because some of them are going in parallel and you have to jump from session to session to session. There's a lot of thinking. There's a lot of collaboration and talking about projects or future collaborations and future projects. There's a lot of just discussion overall on the ethics, on the justice of marine conservation, and just overall how to practically do conservation. So it's a great place to meet old friends, make new friends, colleagues, so forth. But it can be intense. And when I heard that Ayla had been to 2 conferences, not just one, but 2 international conferences, pretty much over a span of 2 weeks, I had to find out how she did it and what she was up to. And in this conversation, we not only talk about each of those conferences and what her role is and what her goals were for each of those conferences, we also talk about her role with Save Our Seas Foundation and her podcasting and how that all integrates with the conversations that happened at these conferences. So it's a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Ayla is such an amazing person, so I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did doing the interview. Enjoy, and here's the interview. Enjoy, and I will talk to you after. Hey Ayla, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about going to 2 conferences back to back?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And I am not too sure. We've just discussed that I feel like my brain's kind of operating on a bit of a lag at the moment. So we'll see how this goes. But yeah, always ready to talk about the ocean, marine conservation.
Everything.
Yeah, everything.
Nice. I love it. I think it's, it's always something. When going to a conference is always exciting to go because you're seeing people that you haven't seen in a while. You get to see all your colleagues, your friends. You make friends there. Collaborations happen, but it definitely tugs on your sort of like in-person battery and emotional battery and just sort of social battery. And it's always a difficult thing to continue on, and to do one is one thing. That's like a week, and then to do another one right after. That's a feat I've never done before. I don't know if I'll ever be in a position to do that, but that's interesting. And I wanted to have you on to talk about that. But before we get to all of that, Ayla, why don't you just let the audience know who you are and what you do?
Sure thing. So I guess I can say I wear two main hats, if you like. So my first hat is I am a marine social scientist. So I work on the management and governance of marine protected areas. So a lot of human dimensions kind of stuff. I work a lot with fisheries, work a lot with government agencies, and try and understand how we can do things better, basically. So that's one hat. And then my other hat is I am science communicator for the Save Our Seas Foundation. So that involves a number of different things. Mainly, I produce and host their podcast, World of Sharks. I hope I'm all right to promote another podcast on your podcast.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
But do a lot of other fun things as well. So I write a lot for the foundation. Pretty much any time they need any form of shark science communicated, that's me doing that. So they're kind of my two main hats. So one is research, and the other is basically get to talk about sharks for a living, which is super fun.
I mean, you can't go wrong, right, with that when you get to talk about sharks for a living. It's pretty fun. We've had you on the Beyond Jaws podcast, Dave and I, and so I'm going to link in the show notes to that podcast so everybody can get to know you a little bit more in your career, because we went in depth in that career. And of course, we've done a lot of interviews with people from Save Our Seas. So those are all linked to those in the show notes as well, so people can get to know Save Our Seas. One of the things that I realized from Save Our Seas, last year I went to the 20th anniversary when they had it in Fort Lauderdale. And it was like, just celebrating Save Our Seas. And everybody that I talked to there said, my project was kind of way out there and Save Our Seas funded it, and it was awesome. It actually helped their career along. It helped launch their career. And I think that was that you don't get to see that a lot with foundations. And I think Save Our Seas is one of those foundations that is just able to do that time after time. And they just take a chance on the person, on the project, and see that it's necessary, but it may not be under the regular guidance of a lot of other, granting foundations and so forth. So being able, like James has a knack, the team has a knack for picking out people and picking out projects that are really great. And I love, always talking about them, because you guys do some great work, not only from a granting and funding perspective, but your science communication teams is pretty cool too. So obviously you're one of them, part of that team. But, it's amazing to be able to get to have you on the podcast and talking about the podcast. Let's actually do that for a little bit, because it's part of this science communication thing. And you asked, is it okay to promote the podcast? I am always of the value of, like, we need more podcasts. We need people to have different voices to speak up. We need to have people to go on different podcasts, because you never know who's going to love the host, the subject matter, and we just need a diverse amount. And I think it's great. So why don't we just talk a little bit about the podcast? How did it all begin, and what does it cover?
So I'll say one thing first as well. Thank you so much for those kind words about the foundation. It's definitely something that I feel as well, working for them. They're just such an awesome foundation to work for, and an amazing team to be part of. A lot of people are quite surprised to find out we're a relatively small team. There's not that many of us, yes, but very passionate and driven people. And one of the things the foundation prides itself on, and is very important to us, is like you said, is seeing the potential in people, and especially supporting people in the early stages of their career. And we're going to go into these conferences later on, but one of the nicest things for me about going to these conferences is just seeing how many amazing people we have supported and helped to get started.
Yes.
And that is one of the core elements of the podcast as well. So World of Sharks, formerly The Whole Tooth. We started out calling it The Whole Tooth. It actually started as a little YouTube series. So back in the day, in 2019, I actually met our current CEO, James Lee, on a boat in the middle of the Hebrides looking for basking sharks. And that's how I got an introduction to the Save Our Seas Foundation, which is probably the most perfect introduction you could have. And then in 2020, when COVID hit and everybody was at home and there was a lot of, parents trying to keep their children entertained and also children, still trying to learn in incredibly difficult circumstances, the Save Our Seas Foundation thought it might be quite a cool idea to do a YouTube series where young people could actually send their questions about sharks into the foundation, and we would assign that to an expert or a professional in the field who could answer their question. And I was brought on as like the host of that. So I would answer some of the questions, but I would also provide a little link in between. And these videos they're still up on YouTube. They're so adorable. There's like kids from all over the world sending in these amazing questions. And then, these kind of big name scientists and our amazing project leaders answering those questions. But we did about 5 episodes, and then James and I kind of came together and said, well, we actually think this would be really cool as a podcast. So people can send in their questions about sharks, and rather than it be answered, in a small YouTube or a small video clip, we were aiming only to have the video clips, to 1 minute. We actually have a whole 45 minutes to an hour where we kind of dive into this topic and kind of really go deep into it. And so that's how the podcast started. And it's kind of really evolved and grown over the years. We haven't quite reached our 100th episode. Congratulations to you and Dave for reaching 100 episodes of Beyond Jaws.
Yeah.
I think that was last week, was it? Or 2 weeks ago?
That was last week, yeah.
Last week. Huge achievement. Amazing.
Yeah, last week.
But so we're coming up to our 70th episode. And we basically cover all different topics related to sharks. Our primary aim is to make shark science and shark conservation as accessible and fun and engaging to as wide an audience as possible. And so my role as the host is to kind of really put myself in the position of the listener and try to really break down those concepts as best that I can. And we have an expert on every week in the field of shark science, conservation, education, and storytelling to kind of take us on a deep dive into a different part of this kind of amazing world of sharks, if you like. So we cover everything from shark physiology to, shark ecology. So where do they go? What do they do? Where do sharks give birth? All of those kind of questions. But we also cover some more serious topics like their kind of conservation as well. So what are the primary threats to sharks and how can we move past those? We have episodes focused on particular species. So we just did an episode on megalodon, which was a lot of fun to kind of dive into the life of this prehistoric shark. And also do episodes kind of focused around the projects of our project leaders. So the incredible people that the Save Our Seas Foundation fund, and try and communicate their work to a wider audience and connect them with the public. So we cover a whole range of different topics, and we keep joking that we thought, by 20 episodes in, we would have run out of things to cover. And we're still going. Yeah. So, it's amazing. And it's so much fun.
That's awesome. It's a great podcast. We'll put a link in the show notes so that people can get access to it. It's such a fun podcast. I learn something new each and every day when I listen to the episodes. I know I haven't listened to all 70. I'll be transparent. I haven't listened to all 70.
That's okay. I'll let you off.
I've listened to a number of them. I've listened to a number of them, and I'm always learning something new. And it's true, though. We do, as podcasters, when you first start out, or any kind of communicators, you feel like you're going to run out of information. but I find, and I don't, and you know, the way I work is a lot of the times I'll speak to somebody, I'll interview somebody, and then during that interview, or I'll listen back to the interview, and I'm like, oh yeah, we could go down this route, you know, or we could start talking about this because they mentioned it's obviously, you know, something that we should look for. Either talk to that person again, or talk to somebody else, one of their colleagues, or so forth, or they'll give me like a referral to say, hey, you should speak to so and so, and you should speak to this person because they can talk on this. And I find that's really helpful when you have, like, especially when you do an interview-based show, to be able to do that. I think even solo, I've been able to, I'm at almost 1,700 episodes now on this podcast. So there's always something to talk about. And if you can't find something, I always say, no, there's always something, especially in ocean science, even in shark science, there's always something to talk about, or someone to talk to. I think that the profession of shark science and shark conservation has really, you know, exploded over the last 10 years, where a lot more people are doing some amazing things. And I think also the power of doing this remote recording, like with software like Riverside, you're able to speak to a lot more people, even with Zoom and stuff, you're able to speak to a lot more people around the world. And I think that really opens up the amount of content. Do you find a lot of similarities in that, in terms of, you know, finding information to talk about and then people to talk to?
Oh yeah, 100%. It's just such an immense joy and a privilege to be able to speak to somebody who is not only the expert in the subject, but is so incredibly passionate about it as well. And once you get someone going on the topic that they're excited about and they're passionate about, that really just comes through in the recording. And it's just one of the greatest privileges. And I think especially, you know, the reason as well behind doing a podcast like this, and I think as well behind, you know, like Beyond Yours, and there's a ton of other like amazing shark focused podcasts out there. Partly the reason why we do this is to change people's perceptions of sharks, right? And to counteract that narrative that's been around for a long time, you know, that one of fear, or, you know, sometimes even indifference. And I think the power of having people who are so passionate about sharks and so passionate about their conservation get that across to the public, and how amazing these animals are and how much there is still to learn about them. I think that's an incredibly powerful tool. So yeah, and I never run out of things to talk about. In fact, that's something that I'm sure, I mean, you've been in this business much longer than me, but something that I had to learn right in the beginning was how to really sort of dial back my questions. One of the biggest fears that I had was that I wouldn't ask intelligent questions, or the guest wouldn't feel like I'd researched them enough. And so I would come with this like huge list of questions to ask them. And I really had to learn to edit that down, because people will go off on these little tangents. And sometimes, like you said, that's the best bit. That's the most interesting part. So you want to leave space for that, right? And I learned that lesson the hard way, quite early on in the podcast. So yeah, that's never been a worry of mine, that we're going to run out of things to talk about. That's for sure.
For sure. When I first started, I would write out 5 or 6, maybe 7 questions. And I'd always think, well, is that too little? Like, maybe I should put more. So I'd have like 10 to 15 questions. And then I realized really 5 to 6 did what I needed to do to get the person talking. And then you're right, it would go on these tangents, and then you would start asking questions about the tangent. Then next thing you know, you look up and you're like, this has been an hour episode, and I can go on a lot longer. And so, you know, it's really interesting. Once you get people who are in this field talking, you get to hear their stories, you get to do that. And I think podcasting has done such a great service to scientists, in that it allows the listener, the audience member, to get to know who that person is, what they're passionate about, how they speak. Because usually you just see it in a paper, or like on a journal article, or you just see it in some sort of, you know, Scientific American publication, or BBC, or things like that. And it's just usually a quote. So you don't really hear them. You don't hear their tone. You don't hear the passion in their voice. So I love the ability for podcasting to bring that up. Now, the other good thing about podcasting is that you can take your podcasting equipment and you can bring it to a conference. And I think you did that, if I'm not mistaken. I've done that before, and I think you did that with the idea of going to. Now, you went to 2 conferences. Do you want to just let us know which conferences you went, and then we'll kind of get into all that?
Sure. So I went to, the first one was the International Marine Conservation Congress, or IMCC, which is organised by the Society of Conservation Biology. And this year that was in Cape Town in South Africa. And then straight after that, I flew to Greece to take part in the the meeting of the European Elasmobranch Association. So 2 very different conferences at other ends of the world. But yeah, a lot of traveling.
It seemed like it was in like a straight longitudinal line. As you like a little bit off maybe, but it seemed like right from Scotland all the way down and then coming back up. So it's not like, I think we talked about right before we recorded, you're like the time zone wasn't too much of an issue because the hours didn't change too much, which is a benefit, I think. But it's still a long distance to travel. How long is the flight from Scotland to South Africa, to Cape Town?
So it's about 12 hours. But then add 3 hours onto that for me because I live right up north in the Scottish Highlands, so I've got to get transport to get to the airport first of all. So in total about 15 to 16 hours to get down to Cape Town. But hey, I mean, it's an again, I have to recognize here, like, the privilege of actually being able to do that. A lot of these conferences are quite inaccessible for a lot of people. So to be able to go and attend these conferences is an absolute privilege, and I can totally sit on a plane for 11 hours to get there.
Yes.
It's no hardship, and watch. I think I watched the entire season of the House of the Dragon while I was on the plane. So
there you go.
Not a hardship.
You get kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Yeah, exactly. Now, usually we go to conferences. We'll start with IMCC because that was the first one you went to on this trip. And when you go to conferences, you go for a purpose, either to present or serve on a panel, to podcast. What were the purposes you went for?
So IMCC was more like multi-purpose for me. So like I said in the beginning, I wear 2 different hats, and one of those is marine social scientist. And I currently lead on a project here in Scotland, which is looking at the management and governance of Scotland's marine protected area network. And IMCC being the kind of Congress of Marine Conservation, that work is incredibly relevant.
Yes.
And so on the one hand, I was presenting, but also the Save Our Seas Foundation has a big presence at these conferences. We usually sponsor them. So IMCC, we were one of the sponsors for that event. And a lot of the Save Our Seas Foundation team were going to be there. So just very quickly, we have kind of like, we have a core team. So our headquarters, which is based in Switzerland, but then we also have the Shark Education Centre in Cape Town, which has a whole team. And then the comms team, which I'm part of, is also based within that centre. But then we also have a research centre on Daros in the Seychelles, and we also have a research centre in Florida. And it's very rare that all of us manage to get together. And there was a lot of Save Our Seas people at IMCC. So it was also a chance for us to connect and us to meet one another, which was amazing. So like the week before that, we got to do a team building day, which was with a company based just outside of Simonstown in South Africa called Velden Sea. And they took us for this amazing like foraging free diving experience. So you like go foraging while you're free diving, and then you cook up the food. And it was phenomenal. And it's just so great to have the whole team together. So I think there was like over 30 of us at IMCC. So it was like great to be able to connect. And of course,
That's awesome.
Alongside of all of that, getting to meet the people that we funded, like I said earlier, and connect with them, and also, help people to know what Save Our Seas Foundation are about. So if they're potentially looking for funding, learn more about us as well. So it was very much a multi-purpose trip. It was very, very busy, but incredibly fun and very rewarding at the same time.
Very nice. Had you been to an IMCC meeting before?
I do not know, but I've presented at ICCB before. Sorry for the listeners. I know I'm bringing in a lot of acronyms here. But it's quite a similar vibe, I think.
Yes. It's similar. I've never been to the ICCB. ICCB tends to be bigger. It tends to be more. It's not just ocean. It's not just marine. It's every realm. So there's freshwater. There's land, and then there's marine as well. So it's a bigger conference. Where marine is sort of the marine section of the Society of Conservation Biology, so it tends to be a little bit smaller, a little under 1,000, I think. I don't know how many were at IMCC. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to this one, but
I know.
Do you know how many were?
Yeah, it was a shame you couldn't make it. So I think there was about 800 delegates at this one, so it's big conference. Yeah.
That is big.
So for listeners, these kind of conferences tend to be, because they're more general. So this is like kind of broad marine conservation. So that can include everything from understanding particular species to marine protected areas to working with fisheries. And so you get delegates from all over the world. And we call them parallel sessions. It's basically like you have different rooms dedicated to a particular subject, and people you have multiple people giving talks in that session. And usually at some conferences, there's only one or two or maybe three of those going on. At IMCC, there was something like 6 or 7 of those parallel sessions all going on at the same time. So it's huge. Yeah, it is intense. And there's a lot of people like running in between rooms because they want to go to one in one session and one in another session. So yeah, it's a big conference, so, and pretty nerve-wracking to present at, I must say.
Why is that? Just because there's so many people, or?
Just because there's so many people, and there's a lot of people there who are like very well established in their field. So for me, there was a lot of people there who I really admire. I've cited a lot of their work. And there's not just academics there either. There's like members from government agencies. There's members from NGOs, conservation organizations. It really is an amazing chance to be able to like network and connect with lots of different people from all different backgrounds from all over the world. So, and the room that they put me in, there was one big hall, and I blame David Schiffman entirely for this. But there was one.
David, calling you out.
There's one enormous hall where they had all the plenary sessions. So that's the people that speak at the beginning of the day and kind of really set the scene for the conference. And it was just this massive hall with a stage at the front. And a lot of the other parallel sessions are in much smaller rooms, with a little projector. Yeah. I was on that big stage, which was so intimidating. so intimidating. But yeah, it was intimidating, but it was exciting at the same time. And it was also the first time I've presented on this research, so that added a little scary element to it as well, because you're kind of thinking, oh, will the results come across okay, or how is this going to go? So yeah, it's pretty nerve-wracking. And my first time as PI as well, so project lead.
Oh, okay. And how did the presentation go?
I think it went well. I got some good feedback. Good. It's always hard to know, because the time goes so quickly when you're in the moment, and I was so stressed beforehand. I normally don't get stressed for presentations, because science communication has always been my bag. So I know that I can present well. But I was so nervous for a lot of the reasons that I've just specified. So I spent a lot of the week panicking, rehearsing, changing my slides again and again and again. And then when it actually comes to it, the time just goes so quickly.
For
And
sure.
then it's done and you're finished and you're like, oh, what was all
Yep.
that? What was all that panicking for? But yeah, it went well, and we had a good discussion afterwards. So we actually
Good.
did it as a bit of more of a panel session at the end. So all the
Perfect.
other speakers in the session kind of got up and talked about it. So, and it was in a
Yeah.
session called Beyond 30 by 30. So it kind of looked at the concept of protecting 30% of
Yep.
land and sea by 2030,
Hmm.
but asked, is that enough, or does there need to be more? What comes after this? And
Yeah.
so it was kind of trying to frame the talk with that in mind as well. And we got some really, really interesting questions from the people who were listening. So yeah, it was very valuable, but it was on the last day.
On the
So
last day. That's okay.
yeah, yeah.
That's okay because you got to do everything else, and then you got to present. Hopefully, you weren't too nervous throughout the week for that.
Yeah.
Um,
Or it's like a bit of a cloud just hanging on the horizon because you can't quite
yes,
relax. You can't,
that's
you
true.
know. And also, like you said, I was trying to plan podcasts and like
Yes.
network, and there's all these social events in the evening too. So, anyone listening who is about to go to one of these conferences or has been and is like, oh my God, they're so exhausting. Everyone finds them exhausting. It is super
Yes.
tiring and
Yeah.
overwhelming. Yeah. It's not a natural
Agreed.
thing to do.
No.
But yeah.
Well, the big thing, especially for IMCC, I've been to a lot of different conferences. IMCC is my favorite that I've been to at this point. I've been to a number of them, three of them at this point. And I find that they are my favorite just because of the support that you get for people who present, the feedback that you
Yeah.
get, the fact that they have like panel sessions at the end of each session or at the end of each group of sessions, a block of sessions to be able to discuss more. There's a lot more that comes out of it than just, if you're an audience member just watching people present their stuff, but you're able to give feedback. You're able to speak to them after. People are accessible, even though there's 800 some odd there. It's nice that you get access. And plus the events at the at night, in the evening, during the day, it's a very social conference, and
It is.
it's there's a bit of a partying aspect to it, I have to admit, but it's a fun and friendly
Yeah.
atmosphere where everybody's approachable. Even for introverts out there, there's ways to be able to inject yourself into conversations and be able to be a part of. I'm an extrovert, so it's very difficult to speak on introverts' behalf. But I've seen people who say, yeah, it actually, like I've heard people say they really like it
Yeah.
because how approachable and supportive everybody is. So I
Yeah.
love that aspect.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I was joking about David before, but David was on the organising committee, and the entire committee did such a fantastic job.
Oh yeah.
If you imagine like how many people you have to organise, how many topics you have to
Oh yeah.
organise, it was done seamlessly. Like I can't fault them. And something that made me so happy, as a marine social scientist. Normally when you go to these broad conferences, or it has been in the past, I think it's getting better now, but all the human dimensions stuff is usually just kind of sectioned off in its own little box.
Yes.
Whereas at IMCC, it was integrated so well into everything else. And there were so
Yeah.
many really valuable and very interesting discussions, especially around equity and social justice in marine conservation. And
Love it. Yeah.
being in South Africa, especially, there was a lot of discussions around things like colonialism and how things like apartheid are still having an impact now on who is involved in conservation, who is involved in
Yeah.
decision making. And one of the keynote speakers, Angelo Villagomez, said something. It sounds very, very simple, but I think it's something we can all remember, is that it's not just the why of marine conservation, so it's not just the why of how we're doing it, but it's also the how. So the process really matters. So how are we involving people? Who is involved? And so there was a lot of really, really valuable discussions around that at the conference, and that's probably one of the main take-home messages for me of that conference, is just
Yeah.
how important those elements are, to the success and the longevity of any marine conservation measure. You know, whether you're talking about a marine protected area or whether you're talking about a fisheries management measure, you know, the human dimensions of that are so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Angelo's a friend of the podcast. He's been on a number of times, and so happy to hear that you're able to get a lot out of that keynote. I know he worked on it pretty hard. So so that's fantastic to hear. He's an amazing
awesome
individual. Yeah, for sure. So you did that conference, and then you decide, hey, you know what? It's not enough that I do one conference. On the way home, I'm going to just do a little stopover into a little known place called Greece. I assume it was in Athens, and I'm just going to hang out with some more, maybe do a presentation or two. And you decided that. So what in the world made you decide to do not only another conference in that year, which is good, but right after?
Well, I think you wanted to take that up with the conference organizers and why they all seem to have their events all at once rather than me. So because I work for the Save Our Seas Foundation, it's often part of our job that we go to events like this. So especially things like EEA, the European Elasmobranch Association conference. Partly because, like I said earlier, we have a lot of project leaders who participate in these events, and it's always great to go and support them. But B, you know, we often sponsor these events as well. So we host social events in the evening so that people can meet one another and network. And it's also a great way for more people to find out about the foundation and the kind of funding that we offer. And the reason that I usually go to these events, aside from IMCC, was a bit different because it was a combination of my own research and Save Our Seas. EEA was mainly for the Save Our Seas Foundation. So for me, as science communicator, it's good to keep tabs on who's doing what, and also to try and think about, you know, what would be a good podcast episode, or can I interview anyone here while I'm here and I have everyone in the same room? Or just to sort of introduce myself. I think it makes people feel a lot more comfortable if they've met me beforehand, and we've had a chat beforehand. So EEA was kind of more focused on that, but EEA is a very different conference to IMCC. So IMCC, broad marine conservation, you know, loads of delegates, lots of parallel sessions. EEA is much smaller, and it's more, it's wholly focused around elasmobranchs, and specifically elasmobranchs in Europe. And so you're in one room for the entire day. There's talks running from 9 a.m. until 7:30, I believe it was, with like gaps in between for networking. Again, the conference organizers IC did, or IC, I should say. So it's I and then the word C as in like ocean. They did an incredible job of organizing everybody and making sure everything ran smoothly, and that there was not only space for as many talks, but space for people to chat and to network in between. And the nice thing about EEA is that because you're in the same room for every single talk, you kind of are, I don't want to say forced, because it's not like you're held there against your will, but you do kind of see, I think, a broader diversity of subjects than you would do ordinarily, because when you're at somewhere like IMCC and you're running in between lots of different parallel sessions, you're going specifically to the ones that cater to you, whereas EEA for me was so interesting because I was not only listening to talks about my subject area, which is like working with fishers and social dimensions, but also learning about tagging and different techniques to tag sharks, and also, you know, new discoveries in their biology and ecology. So yeah, it was really interesting and very full on as well. And then also at EEA too, I was very kindly asked to be part of a panel session on the last day. So rather than have one person speaking as a plenary, they had plenary panels, which is like a panel session that starts the day and sort of sets the tone for the rest of the day. And there was a panel, I was part of a panel on science communication. So it's called Stimulating Public Engagement. So yeah. Yeah, so that was
I
fun.
love it when conferences incorporate science communication. It's such an important tool that we need to do. I mean, we go to conferences and we share our research, share sort of conservation initiatives, discuss important avenues, but then we never really discuss the importance of speaking about the research and speaking about these projects to a community, whether it be in person, whether it be digitally. It's such an important role, and I'm so glad to see and hear of different conferences being able to attach that as a session or panel, the plenary panel, however they do. I think it's really important. Actually, IMCC used to put on Oceans Online, which was right after the IMCC conference, which was a 1 day all about science communication, and it was from an Oceans Online conference that used to happen from Science Online in the US. Unfortunately, that's not around anymore for a number of different reasons, but Oceans Online was probably one of my favorite science communication conferences to go to, and then they added Oceans Online to the end of IMCC. I don't think they do it anymore, but they do incorporate, I think, science communication throughout that conference now.
Yeah, and I think David Schiffman, he ran a workshop on science communication at both conferences, actually,
Great.
which was great. But yeah, definitely going back to EEA, I mean, it's when we talk about education and communication, that forms part of a lot of projects focused around sharks now, like, educating the local community, raising awareness, public engagement of sharks. It's such a huge theme across a lot of these projects. So yeah, it was really cool to be able to be part of a panel specifically about that. And my fellow panelists, we all came from quite diverse areas of science communication. So for me, scientific writing and podcasting, but there was also Felipe, who does a lot of videography. There was Eleonora, who is, also she is a science journalist, and then Ian Campbell and Michael Scholl as well, who are kind of more part of the sort of NGO, that kind of world. So yeah, it was really cool, and chaired by the amazing Eva Myers, who is the heads up the Angel Shark project, so she knows a lot about public engagement and things like that, and community involvement. So yeah, it was cool. It was interesting. It was very interesting.
Yeah, it's good to get it from all. I think when we talk about science communication, for me, I always go to like digital science communication because that's what I do. But there's so many other aspects to it, and I think it's great to be able to present that in front of everybody to kind of inspire people to be like, oh, well, I can do writing, or no, I do have like the Angel Shark Network. I can create a network of different organizations and stuff. I think Project Seagrass does the same thing for seagrass up in the UK, and so it's good to get the background and the challenges and solutions that they all have to overcome and be able to implement when they do these different types of science communication. So that's awesome. Now, I know we're running a little short on time here, but 2 conferences done within a span of, I believe it was 2 weeks, maybe even 2.5 weeks, because you had your team building beforehand. How did you feel after that?
I felt, I mean, aside from obviously tired, because it is pretty full on. I felt incredibly, uplifted. One of the reasons that I like going to these conferences is because I feel like it lights that spark back in you. As a scientist, you're often working by yourself. A lot of people listening to this will be familiar with working from home, and it can feel quite lonely. And then when you go to these conferences and you see just how many people are working to protect the oceans, to understand and conserve sharks, it really reignites that spark, and it spurs you on to carry on in whatever you're doing. And also you get to connect with lots of new people, so new collaborations, new ideas. So I felt very uplifted, and I think it's very easy, I think you probably talk about this a lot on this podcast, is to fall into that doom and gloom trap, right? So, we hear a lot of bad news related to the oceans. And these conferences do have an element of that, because you are hearing similar stories from all over the world. But at the same time, you're also hearing similar stories of, well, we're seeing fishermen be more engaged, or we're actually seeing this conservation measure working, or we've trialed this project here and now it's so successful we have more sharks than we know what to do with. You hear a lot of these positive
Yeah.
success stories, and you see the amount of effort and work that's going into marine conservation. So yeah, I would say I'd felt very inspired and very uplifted by the end of these conferences. Yeah, for
Nice.
sure.
That's awesome. I'll be honest. Like I'm joking about how like the fact that you did two conferences in a row a lot, but it takes a lot to be able to do that and be present at each and every one of them. You're up late, you're up late, you're up early the next day, trying to get all these sessions in, trying to collaborate, you're talking, and then especially going from an area of working from home or even working in a small group to being around surrounded by 800 people and maybe 300 people at the ESA. It's a lot. It's a lot to take. So what helped you get through those conferences? A lot of coffee? Is that what got you through?
I don't drink coffee, so like, yeah.
Oh wow! Okay,
I know.
Okay.
I know.
Did you do some
As
like
an
exercise, or did you get out to do like outside and like when you're in Cape Town to go out and kind of
yeah,
enjoy nature around there, or what
I,
what got you through those?
I did in the beginning. So me and our director of the education centre, Clover, is very into running. So me and her would go for runs early in the morning. But I
Nice.
mean, these sessions are starting at like 8 a.m. So there's really not much
Yes.
time. I think as well, like I think I just run on adrenaline at these things. And
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it is hard, and I think I've reached a point in my career now where I'm more used to that. I'm like, I know I've got two very
Yeah.
intense weeks, and then after then I can
Mm-hmm.
relax a little bit. And you do get inspired by, we were joking about it before we started recording, but people like Rima Jabado, who's just this incredible
Oh yeah.
superwoman who goes from conference to conference to meeting to
Unreal.
meeting, and she's just able to be so present. And I think as well, I know how much energy it takes to for someone to present. Like it's such a,
Yeah.
you put so much effort into it, and so you want to really,
Mm-hmm.
like if they look up from the podium and they see you in the audience, they want to see you looking at them and engaging. They don't want to see you like kind of down on your phone.
Yes.
Or so I try and keep that in mind when you're in the last session of the day. And yeah, you just
Yeah.
meet these amazing people from all different walks of life all over the world, and it's such an exciting thing. But that's not to say that I don't find it hard. And and one thing that I try to do as well is, if you've got new students or early career researchers who do feel a little bit overwhelmed by these kind of things, is I try to also be a bit of a safe space. So if anyone's having a moment like that, if you see me at a conference, you can always come to me and talk about it, and we'll go and get a coffee somewhere quiet. But it's always okay as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I work for the Save Our Seas Foundation, so I represent the foundation when I'm at these events. But it's very okay to just take a moment out for yourself. If you're at
Absolutely.
lunch, maybe just go and have a
Yeah.
coffee by yourself or go back to your hotel room. It is a very full on, overwhelming thing. So don't feel like you're doing something bad by doing that.
Yeah. It is not easy. It is not an easy thing to do one conference, let alone two in a row. But it's definitely worthwhile. And I'm happy that you enjoyed yourself. I'm happy you got to do your presentations and be a part of the panel and represent Save Our Seas and be able to meet in person some of the project leaders, but also future guests on the world of sharks. I'm sure you met a lot of them. Did you get to do some before we go? Did you get to do some podcasting interviews when you were there?
I did, yes. And I'm very excited for them to come out. One I can't talk about because
Okay.
we're not sure when it's going to air. But we do have one
Gotcha.
airing next week with Patricia Charvet. I don't know if you've had her. I think you had her on
Yes,
Beyond
she's
Jaws, did you?
amazing. Yes. We've had him on Beyond Jaws. Yeah, we've had
Yeah,
her on Beyond Jaws. She's
she's
awesome. Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. She's
She
I
she
think
was incredible. Again, Oh, so sorry. I was just going to say again, someone coming from doing workshops all day and then being in talks all day and social events, and then she was like, "Yeah, let's do it tonight." So it was just full of energy and is such a phenomenal storyteller. So we have Patricia on the podcast to talk about the work that she's doing with large tooth sawfish in the Amazonian coast. So yeah, amazing. So that's coming out next week. Yeah. And then we have some more kind of lined up moving into next year as well, which is very exciting.
Yes, I love that. I love that. So, like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes to get access to the World of Sharks, the podcast. I'll put some links to Save Our Seas as well, and the other episodes we did with some of our Save Our Seas crew, and we'll put in Patricia Charvet too, so you can get a little bit of taste of Beyond Jaws as well as World of Sharks. Yeah. But Ayla, thank you so much. I know it's soon after both conferences, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here today and to be able to talk about the conferences. I haven't been to the SA conference yet, but I'm looking forward to doing that at some point. Maybe not back to back to another conference. I'm not sure if I have your Superwoman capabilities, but or Rima's for that matter. But I don't think anybody has Rima's Superwoman capabilities. But no. I'm looking forward to being able to hang out with you at a conference and be able to chit chat and get to know each other more and talk podcasting and science communication. I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you so much for being on this episode of How to Protect the Ocean.
Oh, likewise, I would love that. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You bet. Thank you, Ayla, for joining us here on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on and be able to discuss the much missed that I missed so much, the conference, International Marine Conservation Congress. I don't know as many people as at the European Elasmobranch Association, but as you know, we mentioned a number of people who went to both. Obviously, it doesn't happen every day. This is not something that occurs all the time, but there are some people who go from conference to conference to conference because that's part of their role. Their role is to engage with various people. Save Our Seas is an organization that funds other leaders, and when they are able to meet leaders or support leaders during presentations or be there to see what they've been able to be up to, what they want to be up to, and make those connections and meet potential new leaders later on, it's a great opportunity to go to these conferences for Ayla as well as her colleagues at Save Our Seas Foundation to be able to interact with people and maybe recruit some people and suggest that they apply for grants and foundation money later on. So always a great place to do that. And conferences are a lot of fun. I've talked about conferences before. Ayla mentioned at the end some of her top strategies for conferences, and I think it's really important to have your own strategy, come up with your own strategy, use some other people's as you go along, and you'll learn as you go. But being at a conference is crucial. In-person conferences, as much as I love virtual conferences and the ease of virtual conferences and the expense or the lack of expense, in-person conferences are something completely different. And if you ever have the chance, go to the International Marine Conservation Congress. It is one of the best conferences. It is so supportive. It's very social. It's very much a family when you go there. And you get to meet new people each and every time. I was told that this time there were a lot of new people there, and I think that's great to continue on with the tradition of making it a very inclusive, very fun conferences that can get a lot out of it. Every conference that I've been to for the IMCC is extremely different, and I think that's really important because the people make up the bulk of the culture at this conference, and it's always been great people. And I heard the same thing happening that Ayla told you and others that told me at the IMCC. So love to hear that, continuing to hear that, and I love to hear Ayla talk about the conferences. Sound like a lot of fun, sounded exhausting and draining on her social battery, but she made it through flying colors and was able to tell us about it. So thank you for that. And I want to thank you. If you have gone to a conference or you want to go to a conference and you have questions around that, feel free to shoot them on in a comment on Spotify, on YouTube. If you want to shoot me a DM on Instagram, at How to Protect the Ocean is the account, at How to Protect the Ocean. But I would just love to hear what you think of the podcast, what you think of conferences, marine conservation. Ask me any kind of question. Always looking to continue the conversation that we start here on the podcast. podcast. That's the beauty of having a podcast, is to hear back and engage with people. It's always a lot of fun. So thanks again to Ayla. Really appreciate it. Thanks again to Save Our Seas Foundation for representing at each of those conferences. And I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.